Hey my friend, it's Duc. In this training, I would love to share with you how to build apps with REST API and JSON and networking in iOS. And more specifically, we are going to build this app, this simple app called the weather forecast app, that we are going to download the data from the internet from a server called forecast.io, and will in real time download those real-time weather data into the app, and we'll populate those data into our UI. How can we do that? Now, why do we want to use a REST API or some servers? If you look at apps all around the world's most famous app nowadays, we have Facebook that allows us to share posts and videos and links. We have Yelp app that allows us to search for restaurants or places that we want to go to. Or we have Instagram that we can share videos, we can share photos, or even live videos. How do all of that work? Well, the way that they do is we have a REST API. It stands for API stands for Application Programming Interface. And what is REST? What is API? All of those things I will talk about in just a moment when we step into the training. But just know that in order to do those apps, we have a server, some computers on the cloud, and then we will download some data to the app, or we'll post some data into those servers, and then the data that we get from those servers, in this case our weather app, will be in form of JSON. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Again, you don't have to worry about any of that. I will share with you all in this training. And also you need to know how to build a networking stack, meaning that you have to build in your iOS code, only code that you have to download data, post data, store data, all of those things you need to do, because it is one of the most critical skill that every iOS developer need to master. So I create this training for you. All I have to do now, first step, download your starter project and all the resources, own images and icon and some starter simple code that I prepare for you so that we can get on the training right now. Download that by clicking the link in the description right now for me, and then we'll get started into the training. Let's do it. Click the button right below on the description and let's download the starter project. I'll see you in the training. Alright my friend, burst out your Xcode. Here we go, and let's create a new Xcode project. And for this project, let's just use a single view application. Now let's name this guy, how about Weathery? Okay, and then click next. It's just a name I just came up with. You can call it anything that you want. And then I will put it temporarily in our desktop. Oh, you know what? Let me delete this thing. Close that, and I have to put that in your download folder right here so that you can download the complete project and all the resources for this course right below this link. By the way, you can access to all the lessons of the course, but you have to go into and create a new account with us, I believe. Okay, so let's get into our Xcode project. Now, this course is a little bit different because usually in my courses, we are going to take care of either our UI first or our UI design first. But in this course, we want to focus really on our model classes, on downloading data, on iOS networking, on multi-threading, on JSON and REST API. So that's why let's talk about all of those stuff first, and then we'll talk about how to integrate those into our UI. Very simple, because our design is really simple. So go ahead, let's create a new class over here. I'm going to create a new file, and let's use a Swift file. And for this Swift file, let's name this guy NetworkProcessor, like this, and we create a new file. And because this thing is going to be a helper class that allows us to just from a single URL, the domain, the URL, that we can download any kind of data, any kind of JSON, any kind of things on the internet, and then we will process those from our app. Cool? So let's go ahead and we'll create a new group from this network processor, and let's call this guy our model. because it really is the model section of our MVC, right? So things that download data, things that process data, or dealing with data is usually our model. And then we have the controller, and our views is the storyboard, right? So let's go ahead and let's create a new class here. We don't have to import UI kit because these are only for networking code. So let's class NetworkProcessor like this. And then because we want to download data from a single URL, so let's simply have a URL like that. And because it is a class, then we'll need an init. And because we just have one URL, so we init it with a single URL. So here we use self.url equals to our URL. Pretty cool, huh? Now because here we have the same name in our argument list as the URL as the property of this class. That's why I have to use the self over here. The self here all means is that, hey, I want to have my URL. So this self.url saying that my URL over here of this class right there to be this local URL. Cool? All right. Now, in order to download stuff from the internet, we're going to use a segment of an API called URLSession. And to have that URL session, so let's go ahead and over here, let's create that URL session. Var a session is a URL session like this. And you can see that the URL session class, and you notice that it says the NS URL session class. It's because in the previous version of Swift, and also from Objective-C and many years ago, we have that sections of class. So we have URL session class and related classes provide an API standing for Application Programming Interface for downloading content, which is good, which is what we want. So URL session equals to a URL session like this, and we have to give it a configuration. This configuration is kind of like the settings of the download tool that you want to use. So let's double click on here. Now we need a session configuration. It's kind of like you before, I don't know, now mostly we download stuff from our browser, but before we have like separate application to download stuff, right? So with those application to download stuff, you usually have like configuration. So for example, you want to download some videos from YouTube. So before you have like application to download videos on YouTube, and then you set the configuration of the download, things like you want to download HD, you want to download only the voice, you want to download only the picture, those kind of things, right? But here it is more complicated than that, and we'll talk about that. Cool? So now we do need a session configuration. So here let's create that var configuration, which is of type URL session configuration like this. And then let's initialize that into URL session configuration.default. Because in this app, we use very simple download stuff. We just go ahead, download some data, and pretty much it's just some text, and we have this guy, right? Now, because the app that we are trying to do here, this network processor, it will not use this session and this configuration until we need it. That's why I'm going to prefix this property with a keyword called lazy, and the same for this guy. Okay, now what is this keyword lazy is? This keyword lazy, it means that, okay, I have these properties, but don't initialize it, don't create these properties out of the class until I use it for the first time. Make sense? So usually, right? Usually, for example, this let's URL over here, and you initialize it to be something, or you have it in it here. The moment when you initialize a new instance of this network processor class, you already have these guys initialized, having the values in your memory. But now these lazily loaded property, these you will not have immediately at the time of initialization for that instance. and it will only be initialized the first time and the only time when you call it for the first time. Okay, so we'll talk about that. And then let's pass in this configuration here by the configuration like this. And because we use the configuration right inside this lazily loaded, then that's why we don't have any error, because it's just the syntax. Okay, so configuration like this. Oh, this is self.configuration, by the way. Cool. All right, now why do we want to use this lazily loaded? Well, because number one, we don't need it until we use it for the first time. Number two is sometimes when you there are a lot of properties. These are very cool features in Swift, because sometimes there are a lot of properties that require you to download stuff from internet, and you don't really need it until you use it. So here is a very, very cool way to do stuff in Swift. Now let's talk about a method called download JSON from URL, meaning that whenever we call that method, we'll download a bunch of JSON. Again, if you don't know about JSON, please watch the previous lesson first, and to access to all the lessons, just go ahead and create an account. Click the link below this page and you'll see that. Now, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. I hope that you already know that. So here, when we parse that JSON, when we process that JSON into our foundation objects, meaning that array, dictionary, string, double, integer, those kind of things, then all of those JSON is going to be of type string to any, which is a dictionary, right? All of those JSON is going to be a string to any. And then, because we want to have a way that we can, because now, if you remember, as I told you in the last lesson, right, to download stuff from internet, it takes some time. And then, because a method in Swift, in any programming language, it will be linear like this. So it means that you run it from line number 18 to line number 21, and then it goes, right, and then it escapes out of that method. But now, because downloading stuff, it takes some time. That means that we have to download things here. For example, this method is going to be like this long, right? And then we have download these things. And then at some point in time, when we're done with that download, we have like some segment of data over here. So there must be a way for us to call back and return back that result. But the return result there is not simply a return result for every single method that usually we have in Swift. Make sense? That's why we have to use something called a completion handler or a closure. And that closure, we call it here, the type of that closure, the type of that closure is just like the signature of a function. All right, now I know that this is kind of like confusing, but if you already watched the last session, maybe you have a clue on this. So a closure simply is like a function that you pass around. So here, the type of this thing is, I want to use inside that, I'm going to pass the result to be an optional dictionary of type string to any. And then this closure will return void because we don't want to have anything. Cool. And then let's grab around this guy, a close and open parenthesis like this. And because this is the whole closure, this is the whole return type of that closure, that's why let's create a type alias for this closure. And let's name this closure JSON Dictionary Handler like this. And we make that equals to this guy. So now this JSON Dictionary Handler, from now on, will be kind of like an alias, a nickname for this guy, right? You can use that anywhere else inside this class. And then in here, let's have that function, download JSON from URL. And then we'll have a completion handler, like this, completion. And then, because we are going to escape out of this method any moment, so let's have escaping like this, and then JSON Dictionary Handler like that. So there we go. So this completion handler will be this guy, right? Instead of we do this, we can do that. But now because we have this type alias here, it looks much cleaner for this method. So let's talk about downloading stuff. The number one, from this URL over here, we need a URL request. So let's request to be a URL request with the URL of self.url, like this. Now, all of these things that I'm going to walk you through here, these are just like standard or very boilerplate code in downloading data, some simple data in iOS. So from now on, you have only to understand this thing, understand what's behind the scene and under the hood of these things, and then you can use this class anytime you want, or because you understand that you can just customize this class anytime you want. Now you know that there's a lot of other frameworks like Alamofile or Swifty JSON, those kind of frameworks that people already write this code for you and you just have to use it. But that is cool if you understand these code already, because when you apply for jobs, when you go for a coding interview, they are going to ask you these things, and when you do the work, you are going to need to use these things. So that's why, like, I guess that there are up to 2 or 3 guys in our total iOS blueprint course. One guy just told me last month or so, no joke, he go through these lessons, and then when he go to 5 different coding interview, and they ask him about these stuff, literally, and he get 5 job offers immediately from knowing these just techniques and these knowledge. It's simple, but it's required for every developer. Okay, so I hope that is kind of a motivation for you to go through these just hard things. And then let's have from this request. Now we have the request to download data, right? So now let's have a data task, which is you download the data and then you put that in a local variable. So let's data task, which is a task to download data, to be a session. Now the session is this guy, right? Now is the first time that we use the session. Then it will be initialized when we use it for the first time here, because it is a lazily loaded, remember? Session dot data task. And I don't want to use this data task with URL, but I want to use this data task and then completion handler like this. Cool. So let's double click onto that. And we have the completion handler. So width over here. So we have the width is the, let's use the width is the request like this. And then the completion. Oh, by the way, I think I messed up. So let's redo this data task. And we want to use the with URL request, not a with URL. With URL request, double click onto that. And here we have the request above here. And then we have the completion handler. Here, press enter. And then we have the completion handler like this. So the handler here is just like this thing. A closure. We will get this data only when we done downloading stuff. So this completion handler will get called after a few seconds or after a few milliseconds that we done downloading these things. But it will not be called immediately. Pay attention to this, right? Because these things will get, it will go off to internet, download it for quite some time, and then it will get recall this guy whenever it has the data out here. So that is the data, and then we have the response, and then we have an error. Okay, now over here, let's check out this error. If the error equals to nil, meaning that we don't have the error, meaning that we don't have any error, right? But otherwise, else over here, else, pay attention to this because the code is going to get complex. So else, if we do have an error, then let's print out our error. So simply, let's print out the error like this, question mark dot localized description, like this. We use string interpolation over here. Cool. All right. Now, if we don't have an error, meaning that maybe we got some data, or maybe there's some weird thing with this response. This response is an HTTP response And because it is an HTTP response, then that's why we can check the code of that response. So if let HTTP response equals the response as an HTTP URL response like this. Now, what is an HTTP response? So let's go ahead, open up your browser, and then click into Google and just do HTTP response like that. And then, how about let's see this guy. So we have, there's a lot of things to read, but here we go. Let's just have a look at this thing. So we have the status code element. Okay, so all it means, you can read through this, but all it means is that after you have a request to a server, like a web server, then you have an HTTP response message along with a web page or any data you get from the server. All it means is that it has some code that allows you to know that whether the request, whether the download or things that you want to from the server succeed or not. So you have a bunch of code over here. You see the status code over here. The code here, 100 is you need to continue. Maybe this thing you will know. 404 is that resource on that URL does not found. Or maybe you know this thing. 403 is forbidden, right? Or maybe you know this guy. 504 is gateway timeout or service unavailable is 503. So they have those code, and now we can check those inside this closure. Cool. Now because it is just like limited number of options here, that's why we can do a switch and HTTP response. So switch on the HTTP response like this. HTTP response dot status code like this, right? We want to switch on the status code of the response. And then if it is the case of 200, now let's check what's 200. Okay, it means that it's good, it succeeded, then we're good to go. This means that successful response, right? But if it is the case of default, meaning that it is like other ways, maybe it's bad request, maybe it's unauthorized, maybe it's forbidden, then we are going to just report that response, okay? So let's print out HTTP response code over here, and then we got a string interpolation, and then HTTP response dot status code like that. Cool, because now you can absolutely go ahead and check 5000's code over here, but it's really not what we want to do here. So let's just check case 200, and then we do a default case here. Of course, if you want to do more complex app than this, then you have to check different cases. So here, now we have the successful response. Let's parse this data, and then we return that via this completion handler. So if let the data equals to the data, if the data is equals to the data, then let's parse the data over here, meaning that we do got some data. Let's parse the data into our JSON dictionary. So let's JSON dictionary to be, now if you recall that this data are right here. Okay, so let me print out the data over here so that we can test it out. Okay, so let's test out this data. Open up your browser. Here we go. And I'm going to forecast.io, which is the service that we are going to use for our weather data. So I'm going to do forecast. I'm sorry, let's do developer.forecast.io like this. And then you will see that we have the Dark Sky API. This is a free API. And you'll see that if you get up to 1000 forecasts per day, then it is free. After that, then it could be just like $0.0001 per forecast, meaning that every time you ask for a forecast weather, then you pay something. So sign up for a new account. It is free, and then you will see this dashboard right here.
Now, this dashboard has some pieces of information that maybe you don't want to share it elsewhere, and you don't want to use mine because a lot of students and developers are going to watch these courses. So if a lot of you use these API, and if I don't set up it to be like a paid account, then you may not see it work if more than 1,000 calls a day. Cool? So number one is that your secret key. The secret key is kind of like it tells this API provider that, hey, whenever someone calls a request to our server with this secret key, then that is this developer right here. See? So if I call my API with this URL right here, see this URL, it has the secret key of over here, the secret key over here. Then this server, it knows that, hey, Duc is calling our API. Cool? Alright, so let's copy paste this secret key, and you see that below here it has a sample API call. This means that simply a URL that points to a certain location inside their server, and then it will give us some data. So copy paste this URL right here, and then go over here and paste it into your web browser, and boom, you see that there's will be a bunch of things right now. And the reason why I see this is because I install a what is that? A extension in Chrome called JSON View, like this. So all you have to do is go to Chrome and then download an extension called JSON View, and then you're good to go. So let me do it again. And if you don't see that whole thing, just copy paste, Command A, copy, and then goes to JSON formatter like this, and then goes to any thing you see, and then just copy paste the whole thing, okay, and then process. It means that it will format your JSON in a very nicely format. So this thing is already formatted, so maybe it has some problem, and you will see something like this. Cool? Okay, now let's look at this JSON in the next training. Now I just want to test it out for you, that whenever we call the URL, we will get something out of this network processor. So I'm going to over the app delegate, and then in the application definition launching with option here, let's write some code. Number one, let's the URL to be a URL with the string of our URL. Gosh, I think I just have the clipboard is the whole JSON response. So let me delete this and then goes back here to our simple call like this. And then let me delete this thing. There's a lot of data, you see, and don't worry, we're going to talk everything about this data. Why is it, how is it structured, and how can we use it? Gosh, there's a lot of these. Here we go. So it's up until here. All right, so still keep the return true, and then have the request like this, URL like that, and then let network processor to be a network processor like this, network processor, and then we have to provide a URL, remember, because the network processor will have an initializer that provides a URL. So the URL, let's provide it a URL. We have to ungrab it like this, and then we'll provide the URL. Cool? Awesome. Now let's call the network processor dot download JSON from URL. And then when you press enter, you will see that it returns for us a closure. This closure again has the parameter is a string to any, and this you can put it as the result, okay, or just as like JSON Dictionary, something like this. And then there's some code in here. Cool. So now there's some code in here. Let's print out this JSON Dictionary. like this. All right. Now, when you look at the network processor, you see that this download JSON from URL, and then when the case 200, when we are complete, we actually don't pass anything into this completion handler, right? So we will not expect anything when we print out the JSON dictionary. But if it is successful, then we are going to see this if let data equals data, and then if it has some data, it will print out the data. So now let's run the app, and hopefully we'll see something in the app delegate, and we'll see something in our console. So let's open up our console, open up the simulator. Here we go. All right, so the app is running because we don't do anything yet, but there's nothing over here. There's nothing over our console, right? Let's run it once again just to make sure that because we have our network processor, we have everything is up and running. Why don't we see anything? We have been running code for half an hour. Why is it? All right, so there's something problem here. There's some problem here. The problem, let's look at our network processor. So we have a lazy var for the configuration of the session, and then we have the URL. The URL here pretty much it works because we just copy paste this thing into the browser, and the act of our copy paste the URL into the browser pretty much it does the same thing. Then it makes a request to the server, and then it gets back some data, and then in this case it returns back some string, some text, and it puts right in the web page. Right, so it's the same for if it goes into my website ductran.cl like this. You go to the website ductran.cl, you make the request to my server ductran.cl, and then we return for you some data. In this case, it is also in text, but it's now in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, those kind of things. And then you see that the browser will parse the HTML and CSS, right? So it's the same over here. So now the problem must be in our network processor. So this thing looks fine to me. The handler looks fine, but it doesn't matter because we don't pass anything into handler. We have the request from our URL, and then we get the data task. Right, the data task allows us to download data from a request. Like this, we check if we have an error. If the error is nil, meaning that there's no error, that's cool. And then we check the HTTP response. If the response status code is 200, meaning that we are successful, then we should be able to do that, right? So now let's make a breakpoint over here, and then just click the breakpoint over the kind of like the shoulder of the code over there. And then you'll see that it will stop our program if that code goes through. Okay, so it's running, but nothing goes through. Okay, so now let's put a breakpoint outside of the function over here. Okay, so if the function is executed outside of that, it will go through like that. Okay, alright, so now it runs through this 50. It means that it does call our download JSON from URL, but somehow it doesn't implement this thing, right? So now let me check if error equals to nil. Let's put a breakpoint over the 30, and then let's delete this breakpoint of 50. So let's drag that breakpoint out and then run the app again. Still use the 40 for the case 200. Okay, here we go, it's running, and let's see, any moment now, nothing happened. Why is that? Why is that nothing happened? Now, the reason why it doesn't happen is not something our fault. but because let's delete these things. Okay, so what happens over here is that we have a data task. We initialize a data task from this session, but Apple API requires us that whenever you have a data task, whenever you do own data task like this, you have to call a method called data task dot resume like this, and it says that resumes the task if it is suspended. Okay, all it means is that, all right, now you have a data task, let's start the task, let's start downloading stuff, let's start uploading stuff. That's all it means. Cool. So it's just like a bumper that I didn't tell you before, but here we go. You see that we have 27,000 data bytes. Now, the reason why we have the data is 97,000 bytes is that this is all raw data, and I mean, maybe this version of Xcode, it is just gives us that bytes, okay? So, in the next session, let's talk about how we can parse this data into our real JSON data, from a bag of data like this. How can we put these data into like the strings and the dictionaries and the things that you see over here, what we call JSON. To parse the data into JSON format, again, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. If you don't know about JavaScript, that's all right. All it means is that a JSON, the whole JSON data that you see over here, this is a dictionary. You see this? The format of this is very much like a Swift dictionary. So if you look at the Swift dictionary, for example, over here, you see it has the curly braces, the whole object, right? And then it has key value pairs. Looks at that, right? Key value pairs. The key is latitude, and then we have the latitude, and then the longitude, we have the longitude. The time zone is a string. The offset is an integer. And then look at this, the currently, which is our current weather, it is another dictionary, right? So inside the dictionary here, we have the key called currently, and the value is another dictionary. You see that? All right, that's pretty cool, isn't it? So we have the temp is an integer, we have the summary is a string, those kind of things. And then below here, it has the minutely, which is another dictionary. And if you scroll down, it has a lot of data for the minutely. And then you see the hourly, again, another dictionary. So all it means is that you have to parse a bunch of dictionaries. That's all. Cool. So now, let's go back into our network processor. And then if we do have the data over here, I'm going to have let JSON dictionary equals to JSON serialization, meaning that it will serialize. Whatever that means is that it will parse the JSON. Dot JSON object, and then I'm going to use the with data with option like this, okay? And then the data here, let's use the with data. With option, let's use dot mutable containers like that. Now the mutable container, let's hover this and see what is the API for this. It specifies that the array and dictionaries are created as mutable objects. All it means is that when it returns for you this JSON dictionary, you can change things around. Okay, so you can change things around. It will not be a constant. Now, Xcode is yelling at us. Xcode is yelling at us because we have a red arrow over here. It says that not this thing. Okay, not this. So let's click to this error, and then it says can throw, but it is not marked with try, and the error is not handled. All it means is that this JSON serialization .json object, it can has an error, and in Swift the error is implemented in a throw and catch mechanism. So that's cool. If you don't know about throw and catch, if you want to know about that, just search my name Duc Tran and then Swift error handling on YouTube, and you'll see a training on that. So all it means is that here we have to tell Xcode that, hey, I know that it can throw an error. Let's try to do this. So I'm going to have a do block here, and then let's try to execute this, because I know that this may throw an error, because what if the data here is not a valid JSON object? What if this data here has some like syntax error, right? So there will be an error over here, and if there is an error, then outside of this do loop, we're going to catch the error, let error, and we cast it down as an NS error, like that. Okay, and then if we do have an error, let's print out our error processing JSON data, which is error dot localized description, like that. Awesome. Now we have some error. We have some data. So we have some data. Let's all right. So JSON Dictionary. Now we have some data. Let's see what we can do next. Can you guess what we do next? Yeah, now we have the dictionary. Why don't we just pass that dictionary back into our completion handler, and then whoever called our method here will handle the dictionary, because now they have the dictionary, right? So let's call completion like this, and then we pass in a string to any object, which is our JSON dictionary, like this. And then we have to cast that as a string to any. We use optional here because it may be nil. So whoever calls this thing has to handle with that. Alright, so now let's run the app and see how it looks like, because remember, in our app delegates, we still call this thing. We still have the network processor, and we still call the network processor download JSON from URL. And then if we do have the JSON dictionary, then we will print that thing out. So now let's run the app and see how it looks like. And again, open up the console, because there might be something going on over our console. Here we go, and look at the console. Look at the console, the most important thing so far. So we have a bunch of things, and this is optional again, right? Because we just parse that into dictionary. That's a good sign. And then you look at this thing, right? This is a dictionary. And then you have the data, right? The key is data over here. It's a bunch of data. Pretty much it is like this, right? So that is how you test and how you download JSON, how you parse JSON in iOS. In the next session, we're going to create our forecast service class. And then with this forecast service class, we will parse this JSON into our forecast service object. The object with like properties and methods and functions that we can use in our view controllers. First thing first, I'm going to delete our code over here. Or maybe we just comment this out, and then we'll test it later. And then over the model group, let's create a new file, and this is a script file. And the first class we're going to create is something we're going to forecast service. So let's have forecast service, and then we'll put it inside here, and we create it. Import foundation, that's cool. We don't do it with anything with UI here. And then let's have a class called forecast service, like that. Now, this forecast service, it will contain our forecast API key. Remember this thing? Remember the secret key and then the API call, all of those things, right? So this forecast service, it will contain number one, our API key, and then the URL. And then whoever calls our service with a API key will have some methods for that guy to get the forecast, to download the data. So let's do that. Number one, let's have a let's forecast API key, which is a string like that. Now the reason why it says let's, because maybe someone who set this for the first time, they don't want to change it again, because an app should only have one API key. And then we have let forecast base URL, which is a URL like that, right? Because this is the base URL of our forecast. Now you see, what is the base URL? So look at this. It has HTTPS, meaning that this is a secure server. That's cool. That's awesome, actually, because iOS requires us to use a secure server. And then you see api.darksky.net/forecast/API key. This is your API key, and then slash some numbers, right? So this thing /forecast over here is our base URL. And then we'll insert whatever our API key is, and then we'll insert this thing is simply the coordinates, the longitude and the latitude, and the longitude. Okay, so the API key will be something like this. It has the forecast, right? So it has forecast base URL, and then we'll slash our forecast API key, and then slash our latitude, and then comma our longitude, like that. So this is the whole URL, and we'll construct that from the pieces of information that we'll get. Cool. All right. So now let's have an initializer for our API key, which is a string, and then we'll do self.forecast API key equals to API key, like that. And then let's do the forecast base URL to be a URL of the string, and this string, in order to construct that, all you have to do is copy paste this thing over here, copy that, oops, a string like this. Cool. And then why don't we just put in our API key immediately? So over here, pay attention. I'm going to use string interpolation over here, like this, right? String interpolation. And then inside this, I'm going to insert our API key. And now we have the forecast base URL. Cool. All right, that's pretty good. Next up, let's have a method for this guy called getForecast. And this method getForecast, it allows us to get the forecast from a latitude, which is a double, and then the longitude is again a double. And now, because we are going to need some data returned for us, so let's have a completion handler over here, and because we will escape our method, then we'll need to have escaping, and then this thing, it will return void like this. Now the parameter here, I don't really know what is inside this parameter yet, so let's discuss that later. So now we have the getForecast. Again, let me tell you this again, okay? So our getForecast method, someone who calls this method has to provide us the latitude and the longitude of the location that they are in right now, and then we'll give them the opportunity to have the completion handler. Because when we goes off the internet, right? When we goes off the internet with this URL, it will take some time to download that data. And then when we get that data, we have to have a callback mechanism so that we use this closure. And then the data that we'll get, the results data, will be inside this argument. Okay, we will pass that later. Now, let's check if let's the forecast URL. If we do have the forecast URL to be a string, a URL string of something. Okay, and then now, this URL string over here, we have to somehow construct this string from this forecast base URL. We can use string interpolation again, but here I don't want to use that string interpolation. I want to use another method called the URL with a string relative to our forecast base URL, and we have to ungrab that thing. Okay, so what it will does is that it will add this string over here to this base URL. Okay, now the relative to all means is that, for example, this is the base URL, right? And then when we have relative to, we pass in that this string right here, the API key, it will have the relative to, which is pretty much this URL. Cool. So now this relative to this string, let's use another string over here, and then inside this string, remember we have to pass in the latitude and the longitude, right? So we have string interpolation, the latitude, and then outside of the string interpolation, let's have a comma, and then another string interpolation, and then inside this we use longitude. Pretty cool. Now we have our forecast URL. Next up, let's have the if-lets block over there. Now what do we do? Yeah, we have the URL. All we have to do next is we'll create a network processor object, and then this network processor object, it will download our stuff. So network processor, and then we provide a URL, which is our forecast URL. Forecast URL like this. And then we do network processor dot what? Download JSON from URL. And now press enter. We got the JSON dictionary, right? So here, JSON dictionary, you can put it as of typed, but it can infer, Swift can infer the typed again. And then in here, we have to somehow parse our JSON dictionary into a real weather object, right? So let's have a to-do here. We have to somehow parse the JSON dictionary into a Swift weather object. Now, this is the key. I just have a hint for you. We have to parse it into a Swift weather object, but we didn't have the weather object yet. Aha! Now our job is to create that weather object, right? We have to create that weather object. So over the model, right-click, new file, Swift file again, and then let's have this as the current weather. Put it over here. We create the file. And then inside this, let's make some space. Cool. Now let's have a class called current weather, like that. Now this current weather, if you look at the complete project, we just have very simple pieces of information, right? Just so that I can demo for you API calls and REST API and JSON, everything like that. So we'll keep this thing simple, and later on you can put in as many things that you like. So now the object that we will use, the things inside our data that you use is this currently, which is the current weather, and then we'll use some pieces of information, 4 pieces of information. Number 1 is our summary. Is the sky is clear, or is today is really hot, or is it raining, right? The next thing is our humidity. Humidity over here. This is the humidity, right? How wet it is. And then we have the Precipity Probability over here. I'm not good at weather, so I'm sorry. Okay, and then last thing is our yeah, pretty much it. We have the temperature too. So the temperature over here. Now it is in Los Angeles is 58.95 degree. By the way, because I know that we have a lot of international students, 58.95, it seems like hell, but it's pretty cold because it is in Fahrenheit degree, not Celsius. If it is Celsius, then I guess we don't have to use any cook anymore. We just have to put in a bunch of like a bunch of stuff outside the street, and all the eggs could be boiled. Okay, now let's have some properties for this current weather. Let's temperature, which is an integer. Let's have the humidity, which is an integer. And notice that I all use string optional over here because these can be nil. So we all use optional. Let's the Precip Probability, which is an integer. Let's the summary, which is a string, like this. Okay, again, the reason why I use let is because I only want to set it once. After that, we don't need to set it again, and we don't allow anyone else outside of this to set it. It is only get. Cool? Okay, now let's have an init. Now this init, we don't want to pass in any specific temperature or humidity, any of that. We want to pass in a weather dictionary like this. And then this is of type string to any, right? Now this weather dictionary is exactly this thing without a key, right? After we access the currently key, we get this dictionary. And all it means is that now we have to parse that dictionary, access the properties of that dictionary to get the data out of that and put this into these properties. So now, let me copy paste this sample data over here. Okay, copy that and then put that in a comment like this so that we can see it. Copy it. Here we go, and then let's put it over there like this. So now we have some sample data. Let's parse this thing. Number one, let's have our temperature to be the weather dictionary subscript, right? This again is just a simple dictionary. The reason, the way that you can access the key value pairs in dictionary is you use the dictionary and you use the subscript, access the key, right? So weather dictionary at the key is temperature like this as a string integer. Cool. Now this thing over here, it's cool if we just typing in a bunch of keys here, but what if later on you have a bunch of other methods that also access these keys, right? So let's have a struct inside our class, and then let's have here API, not API key, but API, what is that? So over here, let's use weather keys, okay, weather keys, like that. This is a struct, and then static let temperature, which is the temperature like this. I know this seems like silly, but later on if you use this temperature a bunch of times in a bunch of places in your class or anywhere else, and if the keys of the server is changed, then all you have to do is change in one place and it will be changed anywhere else. And then let's have static let humidity, which is equals to humidity like this, and then static let our Precip probability equals to our, let's copy paste this, it can be some errors, Precip probability, cool. And then the last thing, static let summary equals to summary like this. Alright, now let's use this key over here. Instead of temperature, a string, let's use weather keys dot temperature. That's pretty awesome. Alright, next up, let's have our humidity. Right, we have the humidity here. Let's have our humidity. Over here, let's have if let humidity double equals to our weather dictionary at our weather keys dot humidity. And then we have to cast it as a double. But because this thing, I don't want it to be like nil or anything. I want it to be yeah, let's have that nil, right? So as a double like that. Okay, but now over here, if it is indeed a double, then I want to format it as a humidity equals to an integer, which is humidity double times 100. So that it will be some percentage, right? It will not be like 0.85 or something. And then else humidity equals nil, like that. Again, you make sense? So if you look at our humidity here, it is 0.74. And if we just put it as a double, like this, it will be 0.74. Now I want it to be an integer, 74, so that we can put it in our UI. And then now, let's do the same for our Precip double, because the Precip probability here, it is 0, but in many cases it's like 0.95 or something. So here, if let Precip double equals to the weather dictionary at the weather keys is dot what's that, present probability, right? We cast it as a double like this, and then if we do have that Precip probability is an int, we have the Precip double times 100, else we have the Precip probability is nil. Okay, so now we have the Precip probability, we have the humidity, we have the temperature. Last thing is our summary is the weather dictionary at our weather keys dot summary, right, as a string optional. So now everything is cool, everything is put into our UI. Into our weather object. Now all we have to do is go back into the forecast like this, and then we have to pass that JSON dictionary into our object over here. So we create the weather, right? So now let's delete this thing, and then let's have if let the current weather dictionary. Okay, so here get the forecast. All right, so let's have. We want to have the current data, right? The current dictionary, the current weather. So let current weather dictionary. Again, the current weather right now, the JSON dictionary of here is all a bunch of these data. If we want to have the current weather, we have to access this currently key. So the current weather dictionary, I know this is a mouthful, equals to JSON dictionary, and then question mark currently like this, right? Because this JSON dictionary, it can be nil. So if it is nil, we will not access the key as a string to any. And if it is a dictionary, all we have to do now is get that current weather. So let's have the current weather to be equals to a current weather, and guess what? We have an initializer for this current weather. The all we have to do is pass in this weather dictionary, which is this guy. So pass in that guy, and voila, we have that current weather. Now it is in our current weather object, and now all we have to do is count the completion, and then we pass in something, right? We don't have something over here. Well, we need our weather, so why don't we just have the current weather as the argument for our closure, right? Now, because it can be nil, so let's have that question mark. So if we do have the current weather over here, let's do current weather, right? So current weather and current weather. Again, pay attention, it is lowercase c because it is our variable. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Very simple, incredibly simple. Now, otherwise, if we don't have that, then else over here, let's have our completion. The completion is nil. Last thing to do in this section is we have to test it out, this forecast service, right? So let's test it out. Inside our app delegate again, we'll not use directly this network processor. Let's use our forecast service. So let's forecast service to be a forecast service like this with the API key. The API key, I'm going to use my API key. Don't use mine, use yours. Use yours API key. I'm going to reset, copy this guy, and we have the string, which is this string over here, and then we count forecast service dot get forecast with the latitude and longitude. So this latitude, I'm going to use this guy, Okay, so let me use this guy over here. Gosh, I don't want this to be an. Alright, so is there any way that we cannot make this a URL? Here we go. So that I can copy this guy, 37.82 something over here, and then we got the number like this. Gosh, here we go. Negative the longitude. Now here we are using something we call hard-coded data. But later on in the course, we're going to talk about how to use the current location from the GPS of the phone, right? So that we get the latitude and longitude, the current location of the user. And then the current weather presenter. We have the current weather over here. And here, let's just print out our current weather. If it is nil, then we have some errors. If it's not nil, and if it is this chunk of data over here, then we are good to go. Let's refresh this thing to make sure that everything is up to date, and then run the app and see how it looks like, and see how our console looks like. Actually, here we go. The app may. Okay, so it says HTTP response code is 404. Alright, so there's an error. Actually, let's copy paste this 404 code and see how it looks like. So 44, I get what's that? HTTP response code. What is that error? So it is not found. Not found. Alright, so there's an error over here. So now let's debug what is our error. So let's go for our forecast service. And then whenever we have a bunch of things over here. Okay, so let's have this forecast URL. Okay, so let's put a breakpoint over our forecast URL. And let's run the app once again and see our console. And by the way, to see a console, you have to click over here so that you have the breakpoint over there. We have the forecast URL. Open that up. Okay, let's open. Oh, we don't have the chance to see it yet. So let's jump to the next line over here by clicking over there, right? You see this next line. And then you see that we have the HTTPS. This seems weird. HTTPS, okay. And then we have this thing, and we have the URL. Why don't we have the latitude and the longitude? Oh, it will be relative to, like this. Alright, so I did some testing on my own, and it turns out that there's some problem with our relative to method. So let's do it in the raw way. I'm going to delete this relative to block, and then over our string URL over here, let's insert our forecast base URL using string interpolation, and then we have to have a backslash like that, because after, you see this, after the URL, and then with the API keys over here, we need a forward slash, so that we have the latitude and the longitude. So inside this, we have forecast base URL, and then we ungrab that optional, because this is a optional, and optional is not allowed in a URL. So now let's run the app and see how it looks like, and hopefully we get some current weather. Here we go. Okay, now we have our weathery.currentWeather, which is a object. Finally, we get the chance to design our apps UI. So let's go ahead in your downloads folder. Again, you can access all the downloads for this course right below this video, and click the link right below this video, and then drag out a bunch of images I have for you over here, and we have the background and we have the logo. And then in the main storyboard, let's go over here. Let's delete this thing, or you know what? We need. Let's just leave it there. We'll change the class name in just a moment, and then let's have an image. UI image like this, and then drag it down like that. Pretty cool. And then let's use the image is BG. The content mode is aspect fill. Really cool image. And then let's have another image for our logo. So here the image is logo like that, And of course, it has to be something like 64 by 64. This is too big, so 48 by 48. Still too big. Let's use 32 by 32. Okay, better. Put it right there. Then let's have content mode is aspect fit because it is a logo. We don't want it to be aspect fill. That will look silly. And then the next thing, let's have our label for the name of the city. So put it right into the middle. How about we do that as Los Angeles, like this. And then we do the font. Let's use bold. Oh, you know what? Let's use the system font over here. And then I want to use the headline font. And done. And then you see that this thing is too big. Command equal. Press the command equal button so it will be on fit. Cool. Let's have another label over here. And then how about this thing is like 58 degree, right? And then I want to change this thing into really large, so something like 36. And then the style, let's use light. This is still too small, 64. And then command equal, it's bigger. Still, I think it's too small because our app very simple UI. So let's have like 64 plus 16 is what, 80, right? Gosh, I just did math right on video. Equals like that. Yeah, much better. And then we'll put it right into the middle. We'll do that with auto layout in just a moment. But here, let's put that as 20. Oh, let's put this thing right into the middle of our screen like this. And then we make this thing, how about like really light, ultra light. Done. Move it up a little bit so it looks better. Here we go. And then let's have another label for what is our like degrees Celsius or anything, right? So let's put our label, and then here we use Fahrenheit. Oops. Here we go, Fahrenheit. Put it right into the middle, like this. And I want to change the font into the font is body. Or let's that call out, right? And then we put that right into center align. That's pretty cool. All right, now our UI is done. I want to challenge you. I want to give you a little code challenge because we have been like learning a lot. So let's do a little code challenge. Your code challenge this time is to put in auto layout constraints for this simple UI. So do anything that you like so that it looks good on iPhone portrait mode or iPad version. So that very simple UI, but I guess that it's a good chance for you to practice auto layout. Do it now, and I'll see you in the next section. Let's create a custom class for our view controller over here. We can use this view controller, but again, the name is really generic. So let's move that guy to trash, a new file. Go touch class. This is very simple, a UI view controller subclass. Let's name this guy weather view controller. And then, oh, by the way, let's do that as current weather view controller, because maybe you want to extend this app having multiple screens. The next one, maybe you have like the cities or something like that, right? So let's delete these code over here. We don't need the navigation or any of those stuff. Okay, now let's have a bunch of IB outlet and IB action in our app. The first thing first, we have to change our custom class, right? So this guy, now it is current weather view controller. Let's hold up option key, click into the weather, current weather controller, so that we have the assistant editor open up. Let's have the city name over here, control, drag over there, and then city text label. Next thing, this guy is our temperature label. Okay, and then let's have the background image if you want to change it. background image, view. Okay, that's it. How about this thing? How about the Fahrenheit? Maybe you want to change that. So temperature scale label. Cool. So now let's go back into the standard editor. Make some space here. Awesome. Now, what we have to do right now, the last time, is we need that API key. So let's have that API key from our app delegate. By the way, let's delete all of these silly code. We don't need that, right? So yeah, we don't need any of that. And then let's delete any of these other methods too. We just need the finish launching with option, return true. That's it. We don't need to do anything else in the app delegate anymore. So now, let's have some testing data over here, okay? So let's have the forecast API key is a string. Again, I'm going to copy paste our secret key. It is a secret, so do not use that. And then let's have our coordinate, which is over here. Let me use a tuple. Why don't I call Siri? So let me use a tuple. So latitude is a double and longitude is again a double, like that, equals to a tuple. And again, I want to use this tuple right here, the latitude and longitude. So here we go. See that? Okay. Next thing, inside our view.load, it's time to call downloading stuff. So now let the forecast service to be a forecast service with the API key of our forecast. Oh, this is forecast, not forecast. Forecast API key. Like that, right? Now we have to call forecast service dot get forecast with the latitude and the longitude. So the latitude is coordinate dot lat. The longitude is coordinate dot long. See that? So that we can have a group of values inside a tuple like that. And then press enter. We have the current weather, right? So over here we can check if let current weather equals to current weather. This is lowercase c, guys. So like that. And then we have the current weather. Now, what do we do? Now we have the current weather. What do we do? Yeah, we have to change our properties over our outlets from the current weather to these outlets, right? We have to put in the temperature at least. We need that temperature at least, right? So that we know that it works. But there's a problem. There's a problem. The problem here is that I hope that you already watched that video on networking in iOS. Okay, the multi-threading, those kind of stuff, very simple, but I hope that you already watch it. So the problem here is that the view.load is in our, what we call the main queue. But the closure, what is called over here, is off the main queue. This is right now, currently, off the main queue. Off the main queue, right? Because when the main queue again is all about UI code. Anything that deals with a UI code has to happen in the main queue, on the main queue, or on the main thread. But now, we're off the main queue because we are downloading some stuff over the internet, and that thing is of less priority, so that it could be off the main queue, so that it will be in like other kind of like a thread of execution in your phone, right? But the rule in iOS here is that all the rule, okay, this is the rule, very, very important rule. All UI code must, this is a must happen on the main queue. Otherwise, if you call it right now of the main queue, you change some IB outlet or IB actions, or later on even worse, you do it in like tail view, collection views, that kind of stuff. It will be a mess. It will be a mess. There's no really, there's no kind of like finite behaviors, but it will be very messy, and you will realize that at that point, check your queues. Okay, so here, how we can get back to the main queue? We have to get back. Okay, so what we have to do here is get back to the main queue. Get back to the main queue. The way that we use to get back to the main queue, very simple, is we use Grand Central dispatch. Okay, so here we use dispatch queue like that dot main, which is, hey, dispatch queue, get me the main queue. Now this dispatch queue all means is that if you visit New York City, then you'll see that there's a subway station called Grand Central Station, right? And then this is like a huge, giant train station, and they call it after that. That station called Grand Central Dispatch means that it will kind of like navigate around, and it will be the station for a bunch of queues and a bunch of trains. And if you imagine a queue of execution in the computer is just like a train, then you can use that dispatch queue to jump between each train, each queue. Right? So here we say that, hey, dispatch queue, get me the main queue, and then async execute this chunk of code. Okay? So we use the async over here, and then we execute this chunk of code right now. So here, let's put the code right into this closure. So here, if let, we got the temperature. So if let temperature equals to current weather, current weather dot temperature, and then we do what? Self dot temperature. Here we have to use self, so you can use temperature label dot text to be a string with the string option. Like this. String interpolation of temperature, like that, right? But now it will yell at you, there's an error, because we are currently in a closure, and if you want to use a property of this class, you have to use self.temperature. Cool? Now, if we don't have the temperature, so let's use self.temperature label .text to be something like this. Okay, so that we know that there's no data. Now run the app and see how it looks like. Hopefully we got some data. Hopefully we got some weather. So here, let me refresh this data, and we have the temperature is 60.8, and it is 60.
Alright, my friend, so that is our weather forecast app. It's a pretty simple app, but you see that there's a lot of code and a lot of operations involved. I hope that you enjoy this training as much as I enjoy creating it for you. So as always, if you have any questions, feel free to post it right below this video for me. I will try to answer as much questions as I can. And a lot of you ask me where to go from here usually, because if you have these trainings, if you love these trainings, and if you love to dive deeper into iOS development with me, build even more apps, become even more skilled at iOS development, at building apps, then I have a program for you called Total iOS Blueprint. So if you would love to join me for more advanced training, more comprehensive training, just click the button below this page, or in the description there will be some link for you to see the program. If it fits you, I cannot wait to see you in the program. I would love to serve you even more in the program. So as always, go out there every single day of your life, learn new things, craft your ideas, and contribute to the world. I'll catch you next time.